of Programs and Policies here at the Housing Alliance. And I want to thank you all for joining the webinar today. We are here to talk about eviction. Eviction completely disrupts tenants' lives and saddles them with a court record that can negatively impact future housing opportunities for years to come. One way that the Housing Alliance is working to prevent eviction is by promoting mediation programs that stabilize renter households and prevent unnecessary evictions. For those that may not be familiar, mediation is a facilitated process that allows for both sides of a dispute to come to the table to identify the root cause of their conflict and provides equal agency to each side to come up with a solution that works for both. Mediation is an ideal intervention for landlord-tenant disputes, and when combined with emergency rental assistance, landlord-tenant mediation is a holistic approach to stabilizing the rental relationship as well as preserving the housing opportunity for the tenant. So mediation as an eviction prevention strategy is very adaptable and really is good at achieving reconciliation between the tenants and the landlords at any point in the eviction process. But research is showing that the earlier the mediation takes place, the more likely the housing opportunity and the relationship between the landlord and the tenant can be saved. So today we're going to learn about the efforts of the Allegheny County Housing Authority and Just Mediation Pittsburgh to prevent any eviction filings against residents of public housing by using mediation at the first sign of trouble, whether it be missed rent payment or some other form of breach of lease. So I hope you will all join me in welcoming Aaron Erb, Executive Director of Just Mediation Pittsburgh, Rich Stevenson, Chief Financial Officer of Allegheny County Housing Authority, Abby Ray Lacombe, Executive Director of Rent Help PGH, and Adam Debo, Managing Attorney for Neighborhood Legal Services. Now that you know who we are, I hope you'll take a moment and let us know a little bit about you. So we are going to put up a poll, and I'm just hoping that you can answer real quick and let us know what type of organization or affiliation do you most identify with? Are you a tenant, a landlord? Are you a mediator? Are you somebody who's working for a public housing authority? Maybe you're somebody who's providing homelessness assistance or some other sort of social service provider providing those really critical wraparound supports, an affordable housing developer or property manager, something like LIHTC, legal assistance or from the legal community, or anybody involved with state or local government, or if you don't fall into that category. So, looks like we got a few answers. Just want to give it another second. And it looks like the vast majority of folks joining us are coming from the homelessness and social service sector, but we also have a few folks from housing authorities and affordable housing developers, and we have quite a few mediators joining us. So that's really exciting. So with that, we're going to do some level setting to get the conversation started. And so I'm going to pass it over to Aaron, who's going to give a brief overview of just how this program and partnership looks.
Thanks, Gail. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. It's good to be with you. Really glad to be on this call with my colleagues here. Adam and Abby Ray and Rich have been incredible to work with in this program. And so it's kind of fun to share about the successes of what a partnership with a housing authority, and specifically with the Allegheny County Housing Authority, can look like in tandem with legal aid services and resource navigation, so that we're not just following kind of old models of mediation where you assume that two parties are coming in with the exact same amount of power. You assume they can talk through any issue, and you assume that they can follow through on all of their agreements on their own, when we know that in the eviction landscape, the power dynamics are very real, and that we need to be supporting both parties to be able to actually achieve what they want as an outcome to avoid eviction and to prevent it, really. So I will share my screen and work through, I think, literally 4 slides to be able to talk through what our process has looked like with the County Housing Authority, because this is something that's been a really iterative thing. Can folks see this okay, panelists? Is this showing up okay? Lovely, that's great. So, oh, here, let me bring it back. So as we shaped this project, JMP had been doing mediations with kind of volunteer partners for quite a while, and what we were seeing with ACHA was that a couple of tenants were reaching out requesting mediations, and we saw an opportunity to actually develop a much deeper level of engagement with the landlord, with the housing authority themselves, to be able to proactively send along cases where they knew that there were some level of issues with tenants, especially if it's centered around non-payment, but also if it included neighbor disputes or issues between property manager and tenant, or any range of things that have been getting in the way of a really smooth tenancy and a really smooth relationship between the housing authority and the residents. So we wanted to shape a process that was going to actually lead to the kind of trust building that's required for mediation, where residents know that they have a partner at the other end of the table in their housing authority that is willing to work with them, that is trying to find solutions and not just kick people out when problems arise, but is looking for support to be able to do that well. So I've outlined this process here that really roughly speaks to what we've been doing, what the JMP team has been doing in collaboration with Neighborhood Legal Services and with Rent Help PGH to be able to work with the County Housing Authority. So we wanted to, again, put the onus on the housing authority, if that was going to be possible, to be able to consolidate all of the possible referrals for mediation and send them in on a fairly regular basis, rather than having individual tenants reaching out and running the risk of duplicating referrals and things of that nature. So the County Housing Authority, that's ACHA, Allegheny County Housing Authority staff, sends a weekly spreadsheet to Just Mediation Pittsburgh for these potential mediation clients. These are tenants who they've identified as having some interest in the mediation process. My team at Just Mediation Pittsburgh then contacts those tenants to see if they are indeed actually willing to mediate, as they've said they are, to help explain the process, to be able to walk through what this actually looks like and what this will require of them, to be able to communicate their needs clearly, but also be able to listen to what the housing authority is needing from them as well. We'll talk with the housing authority staff if there are kind of unique situations that need a little bit of extra pre-mediation work. And then our staff schedules the mediation and assigns a mediator, which comes from a pool of, in our program, about 75 community members who have been trained for 40 hours as mediators and actually conduct these mediations for a stipend, to be able to kind of deepen the pool of mediation in our area, to nurture those skills that did already exist in our community, and to be able to kind of diffuse the knowledge and responsibility for mediating. We didn't want to be a program that just had 2 mediators on staff, when we knew that these skills existed more broadly in the community, and we wanted to support them, acknowledge those skills, and compensate for them as well. So that's the program that we've been operating. So in the pre-mediation process, our mediators are calling the tenants and sometimes the staff to be able to help additionally prepare them for mediation. So the tenants are already hearing from our program staff at Just Mediation Pittsburgh, and then when they're assigned the mediator, they're actually hearing from the mediator as well. That can feel redundant at times, but is something that we are really committed to, because it helps the mediator and the tenant themselves actually build some rapport for the mediation. We do not expect people to have their most constructive conversations with complete strangers. So we wanted to have mediators actually engaging with tenants prior to the mediation, so there's even one point of contact and one friendly voice on the other end of the phone, not advocating for the tenant, because that is not the role of the mediator, but to be able to say, let me hear what is going on for you, and what do you need for this mediation process to be successful, so that they can help set up a space where a tenant is going to be heard, just like they're trying to set up a space where the ACHA, where the housing authority staff member is going to be heard as well and have their needs addressed. So for steps 5 and 6 here, if it's necessary for the case, which it very often is, our mediation organization is connecting with Rent Help PGH, represented by Abby Ray Lacombe here, to be able to connect a resource navigator to be able to work further with the tenant and the ACHA staff member to connect them to resources that are going to help them actually achieve the kind of agreement that they want to achieve. Anybody can say that they're going to do A, B, and C. Anybody can write that down, and not everybody can follow through on that. And so the real beneficial thing about a resource navigator is that they are there to help both staff and tenant actually follow through on what they're saying they're going to do by connecting them to the appropriate resources and making a really, really warm handoff so that they are not left alone to navigate the kind of complicated landscape of rental assistance or food security or other kinds of things that people are going to be coming in and saying, I need some help with this to be able to maintain this tenancy really well. If requested by the tenant, they also have the opportunity to work with neighborhood legal services. We actually design our process so that before the mediation, we are asking tenants to opt out of this service instead of opting into this service, because we know that tenants who are living in housing authority properties are in their housing of last resort. And we want to make sure that going into the mediation, they don't need to approach it like a court hearing, because it's not a court hearing, but they do need to know what their rights and responsibilities are. And so to talk with a legal aid attorney like Adam is the opportunity to be able to go into the mediation and know a little more about what they can be asking for reasonably and how they can approach that ask so that they are heard and responded to really well. And that's what Adam's staff has been doing a really good job of in preparing tenants for mediation. Like, are you paying the kind of rent that you should be paying, or do you need to recertify so that you're actually paying the appropriate amount and the housing authority is getting the appropriate subsidy for your housing as well? And Adam will probably talk more about that, but that's been a really critical part of our program as well. They are also able, as tenants, to reach out to neighborhood legal services after the mediation has happened, but before they have signed the agreement, to be able to review their agreement if they choose to, just to make sure that everything is above water. Not a ton of people are taking advantage of that right now, but it's been really useful to have that opportunity a few times, especially early on as we were kind of hashing out these details of legal aid prior to mediation, because it makes sure that tenants aren't agreeing to do things that are completely outside of the law or that are like very much beyond what they're able to do as well within the law. And so it's been good to have a partner in ACHA who sees the value in that and not the threat of that, because the legal services are not a threat. They're a way to make sure that tenants are actually agreeing to things that they can achieve. And that's been a really good part of this partnership. So once all of this pre-mediation work has happened, then the mediation session occurs over Zoom. The parties are able to sign an agreement over Zoom if they're coming to that agreement, which they have so far with this partnership every time except for once. And I think we've done about 90 mediations and have almost 50 more scheduled right now. And that's mostly within the last few months. And then the mediation documents are sent to all of the parties, including the housing authority staff and the tenant, so that they have that on record. And this is not just a conversation that gets lost in the ether, but is actually a virtual document that they get to hold with them and hold themselves and each other accountable to moving forward. Just want to really quickly highlight two things we did with the housing authority to help nurture this partnership too. One was communicating with the tenants effectively about what mediation is. I know that this picture, the screenshot of our letter is going to be a little bit difficult to see, but the housing authority wanted to work with us to be able to send a letter to their tenants to say, in most cases, we're working mostly with non-payment cases with the housing authority. And so they're saying, hey, you're behind on rent. There is this process of mediation that you can do with a third party. It's not with us, it's with a third party that we've invited in. And we'd like you to take advantage of this, if you will. So reach out to us if you want this, and we'll make it happen. Sending out that letter has helped to increase positive responses to mediation, but it's also been helped when the county housing authority staff have not only sent the letter, but have also followed up with the tenants as they're delivering that letter to say, no, this is a piece of paper. This is what this means. This is how we think mediation would help you. And this is why we want to work with you to mediate. And again, we've had a really good partner across the aisle to make this happen. And I just wanted to take a screenshot real quick of a referral spreadsheet that we use. Again, the details might not be important to many of you, but what we did here and what this symbolizes is the partnership with a large landlord, in this case, the County Housing Authority, to be able to share the information that we need to make good referrals. So that, again, we're not risking losing referrals to duplication if the housing authority and the tenant are both requesting mediation, but we have things all funneling through one simple system. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen with that, and we can certainly come back to some of those details and talk more about them. But just wanted to overview the process and highlight just how important it's been to have partnering organizations like Rent Help and Neighborhood Legal Services, and then also a landlord partner like the County Housing Authority to actually make this go smoothly.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for that overview. And before we get into a discussion with the panel, I just want to take a moment and see if anyone joining us today has a mediation program or is looking to start a mediation program in their community. We'll just give it a second. Jen, I'm going to let you decide when we close the poll, since you're the one who can see the answering. Great. Yeah, so it looks like we're seeing a lot of folks who are working with mediation in their community. We are also seeing a good chunk of folks who are looking to start one. So again, for those folks who are looking to start one, please feel free to reach out to the Housing Alliance, and we have some great resources to help you start. And then also we always bug Erin to help give some technical assistance for anything that we may not know about. So let's go ahead and close the poll and get into the best part of today's webinar, which is the really meaty discussion. So my first question is to you, Rich. It's a two-parter. First, I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, the scale of your public housing program, and then also what prompted you to seek out this partnership with mediation.
Sure. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm getting over COVID and have a little bit of a COVID cough. So if I cough on occasion, I apologize to everybody on the call. It became evident very early on during the eviction moratorium, the impact that it had, and for the housing authority, I'm sure for most landlords, that we were running into a situation that not only was it an eviction moratorium, but not all, but some of our residents also took it as a moratorium on paying the rent. So we could see early on that there are going to be some issues that we needed help with. And then as the eviction moratorium was extended a few times, as we would tell our residents, okay, for the eviction moratorium, it has an ending date. After this ending date, you need to start paying your rent. You need to get back into it. We would say that, and then as I'm assuming most landlords know, is when it was extended another period, our communication with the residents sometimes it wasn't. They were just waiting for the next extension of the moratorium. So unfortunately, by the time the moratorium came to an end, many of our residents have dug themselves in a very large hole of having outstanding rent balances. Now, of course, as a housing authority, we receive funding from the federal government. Our sole mission is to provide housing to low-income residents. We're not in the business to evict residents. We're in the business of trying to help them have safe, sanitary homes and to live in. So we knew we had an issue that was, at that point in time, kind of grew much larger than we could handle ourselves. So as we started talking with and started taking part in a local, we had calls every couple of weeks identifying the various partners, which we all had the same goal of how can we keep residents in their units, not go through the eviction. But of course, as a landlord, I not only want to do that, we have financial. We couldn't afford to not collect the rent from the residents. And so we not only do we want to keep them housed, but we also had to come up with a solution to collect the rent. So in doing that, we developed a partnership, and it was, again, just as it says, it was a win-win for everyone. That we could, if we set up a mediation, if we were able to get a resident, and at this point in time, ERAP was still available. ERAP is still, but a lot of our residents weren't signing up for ERAP. As much as we went door to door and knocking, a lot of our residents weren't signing up for ERAP. So what mediation did for us was several things. We were able to get the resident through the letters that Aaron mentioned, or by knocking on doors, or even sometimes having the other social services calling. Once we were able to get the resident to sign up for mediation, now you had other voices outside of the housing authority talking to the resident, saying, listen, eviction moratorium's over. We got to come up with a plan. We got to get you back into the habit of paying your rent. But the good thing is we also have resources available. Back then, again, it was ERAP. So if we can get a resident sign up for mediation, the benefit of that was, number one, as Aaron talked about, through rent help with Abby Ray's organization, we were identifying what resources were available. Maybe if they received ERAP and they only received their 8 months worth of ERAP, by working with right on the mediation call, we identified, are there more funds available to help the resident to stay in their unit? Not only that, you also, at that point in time, prior to the mediation, but prior to the call, Adams with Neighborhood Legal Services Department, they were contacting the residents and offering them any legal assistance they need, but also was another voice coming from a non-landlord voice coming from Neighborhood Legal Services saying, hey, listen, the eviction moratorium's over. We got to get you back into paying your rent. There's help available, but you have to understand you're going to have to get back into paying your rent. So with the mediation and setting up the mediation, as Adam mentioned, the agreements, the mediations usually take about an hour and a half. I mean, if maybe an hour and a half. So we were able to get a resident on a phone call, get it with the mediator. Within an hour and a half, we're able to get an agreement signed, an application usually filed for any type of rental assistance that may be available. And also give the tenant an opportunity to raise any concerns they have about non-rental issues, or if they needed to do a recertification, we were willing to do recertifications. We were willing to set up repayment agreements. Again, we wanted to keep the resident in the unit because number one, that's our mission, but number two, financially, we needed to keep the tenant in the unit. If we had an opportunity to get rental assistance to pay their back rent, we needed that. As everybody knows, for a landlord, that eviction of a tenant is very expensive. You have to go through the legal costs. You have to go through the time of the manager going in front of the magistrate. That's all cost, and not to mention the unit turn. Once a tenant would have to leave a unit, you have to provide the maintenance cost, the maintenance material to get that unit to turn over for another unit. So we identified the cost of evicting somebody also was so much more than the cost of coming up with the resolution so the partnership yes, it's fulfilling our mission, but it's financially, it was the best financial situation and solution to a very large problem. What we identified, though, even though when ERAP was over, the great thing with the Rent Help Pittsburgh, they have Rent Help navigators on staff that they always know the additional pot of money that may be coming in, the additional funds that may be coming in to help a resident in a financial need. Obviously, we don't know that. We don't have all that information. We're not, we're running the housing authority. We're managing the property. We don't have access to all. So they know, even someone who, now that ERAP is over, as we go through mediation, they're already identifying what can we do to help that resident stay, what other financial services. So it has worked out very well for us financially. It was a great financial decision. It continues to be a great financial decision. As a CFO, I had to be cognizant of that. But it's also helping the housing authority fulfill our mission. So that's why we got involved. And this is a relationship I believe it's not just now. It's a relationship that we built. It's going to be in place for the next 20, 30 years, long after we've all moved on. And it's a benefit. And again, truly is a win-win for everybody involved.
Thank you. And can you just share with folks how many public housing residents you serve?
Yeah, we have roughly 3,400 public housing residents, but we also have other non-public housing units that we manage, which would roughly about 1,500 between Section 8 and other tax credit units. So we're close to 5,000 in total.
That's a big portfolio. So my next question I am going to direct to Abby Ray. One, I'm hoping that you can give a little bit of background on Rent Help PGH, and then also if you could share with folks why having a third-party resource navigator is really important to this collaboration, especially when, you know, a lot of public housing already has resident services. Like what's the difference between what you do and what they're doing?
For sure. Rent Help started and we launched in July 2020, actually, as an effort to provide resource navigation assistance to folks in need of COVID rental assistance programs. I think we all can share the tremors of remembering RRP. That was an insurmountable application. And it was tough. So that's where we began. Very quickly, as the CDC moratorium came into play, which we might remember was an opt-in moratorium. It was not automatic on behalf of the tenant. The tenant needed to complete certain documentation in order to be covered by the moratorium. We expanded our efforts outside of resource navigation to include outreach to individuals with eviction filings. In collaboration with the Create Lab at Carnegie Mellon University, we have a pretty excellent database that if anybody has questions about, you're welcome to follow up with me after this panel. That is an Airtable that scrapes the UJS portal for the Commonwealth and populates all eviction filings in Allegheny County every day. So using that, and with our relationship with the Community Justice Project and our relationship with magisterial district judge offices in Allegheny County, of which we have 46, we receive around 85% of complaint forms, which gives us right around 85% of addresses for individuals with eviction filings. And we started sending mailers to those individuals with the CDC forms that they needed to complete and instructions on how to access the CDC moratorium. From there, we've grown dramatically in terms of our resource navigation services to individuals experiencing eviction in Allegheny County or at risk of imminent eviction in Allegheny County. So those that have received a notice to quit or who have received a verbal or written threat from a landlord, but the notice to quit has been waived in the lease. Due to this, we serve a very high number of people in Allegheny County. We have about 14,000 eviction filings annually pre-COVID. We are on track to have quite a few more than that this year, and have therefore become really heavily engaged in eviction prevention strategizing and rental arrears program development with both the city of Pittsburgh, the Allegheny County Department of Human Services in particular, as well as many of the program administrators. So that's a little background on us. Gail, is there anything that you wanted me to touch on that?
No, I think it's just, you know, again, now looking at your role in this partnership and how this third party resource navigation works, especially where some folks may be like, we already have staff that are doing that.
So I think there are a lot of benefits to having a third-party resource navigator, but the first is that due to landlord-tenant structures in the United States, whereas Aaron said earlier, there's already a real slanted power balance, and law in Pennsylvania really enforces that power imbalance, leaving tenants in a very small position to be able to voice their concerns, understand their rights, or affect any agency about their personal situation that has brought them to being unable to pay their rent. And a third party is really able to go in there and get to the bottom of the issue more rapidly. So an example outside of mediation that I would cite is we work very closely with the Court of Common Pleas and do a lot of appeals work with tenants and eviction filings. Arbitrators are continually bringing up, they never hear anybody talk about childcare as an issue that led to them being unable to pay their rent. But a tenant is not in a safe position to talk about being unable to care for their children and maintain a job when they are in front of an arbitration board that is going to make them homeless. For so many of the individuals that we are working with, government is government, and government is most often on the side of the person with the most power. And they are experiencing this from so many directions in their life so often that they can't share their fullest story, and therefore they cannot get the core needs addressed. What we have found to be very productive inside of mediation resource navigation is that the resource navigator is able to peel back a lot of the layers of the problem to identify what are the resources that we really need to connect you with to support you during this process, but to prevent you from ending up in this situation later. Rich mentioned earlier, and I think that most housing authorities would have some agreement with this. Their job is to run the housing authority, and it's a lot of a job to do. I'm not sure how other counties in Pennsylvania work, but in Allegheny County, we have a very provincial network of rental assistance. We are working, especially since ERAP, on building unified rental assistance systems. We are having a lot of engagement from all of the important players to make that happen. But the reality is, for most individuals in Allegheny County, they are dependent on localized rental assistance. And when I say localized, I mean, what zip code do you live in? What borough are you inside of? What is your family makeup? And these are the details that are going to allow us to identify an appropriate rental assistance for you. The next aspect that I would say is a really great benefit to a third party is Rent Help is very serious about data capturing and using that data capturing to advocate for serious systematic changes, such as a unified rental assistance program, so that it is much easier for us to connect individuals regardless of their zip code, regardless of which corner of the county they are inside of, with the services that they need in order to become the tenants that they want to be, and up to this point have not been supported effectively to achieve.
Great, thank you so much. So my next question to Adam, but before I throw it at you, why don't you just talk a little bit about neighborhood legal services and how you work in the community?
Sure. So for those of you that might not be familiar, Neighborhood Legal Services is a nonprofit civil legal aid firm. So we are effectively public defenders for folks in civil legal situations. So if you're in a criminal situation and you can't afford an attorney, you are guaranteed one. That is not the same thing on the civil side of things. So for folks under certain incomes, indigent populations, we provide free representation and advice in civil legal issues. A large portion of our practice revolves around housing and landlord-tenant. That's probably about close to a third of our practice is in the housing realm. Really, this program aligns with our priorities generally. Our highest priority cases are folks who are living in not just subsidized, but public housing. Those folks are the most at risk, and also the folks with the most amount of rights as well. So we want to make sure that those folks are understanding what rights they have, and that really aligns with with our priorities as a firm as well. So that's been our mission statement for quite some time. We work largely in housing at all levels, and have worked with the housing authorities before, and I'm glad that Rich framed the relationship the way that it is. A lot of times I think folks see it as adversarial, but when you boil it down to what the housing authorities do and what firms such as us do, both of our goals are to keep folks housed. It's just that sometimes there's some bumps in the road that we have to address.
Excellent. So in explaining your program, you really talked about how public housing residents do have extra protections that folks in the private market may not have. So can you explain or touch on how mediation impacts or those protections? Could there be an adverse impact on tenant protections by using a mediation program?
So I think that under normal circumstances, if folks hadn't, like folks like Aaron and Rich and Abby Ray hadn't gone through the measures to make sure that those rights were being protected, then there may be some adverse impact. But because that they've gone the extra mile, made sure to take the steps to get neighborhood legal services involved, make sure to have the open line of communication between the county housing authority and all of our partners, that is not an issue for us in this particular program. As it works, like Aaron had said, once the referrals come in, folks are sent to ourselves in neighborhood legal services, and we have attorneys who speak to the tenants prior to their mediation. We identify the issue at hand. And this goes back to something that you said right in the beginning, Gail, which is this is kind of a holistic program as well. So obviously we all understand that if rent needs to be paid, the quickest way to solve that issue is to throw money at the situation, which certainly is true. But the best way to make sure that there is sustained long-term success in that landlord-tenant relationship is to solve the underlying problem. So folks will come to us, they'll talk to one of our attorneys who has expertise in understanding of the rights that public housing tenants have, and we'll look at what the underlying issue is. Maybe there's a recertification issue and the tenant needs to make sure that they're paying the proper amount of rent. Maybe there's a habitability issue and they need to have an inspector come out. Maybe there really was just some sort of situation, life happens, and getting some rental assistance will solve the situation in and of itself. We diagnose that issue prior to the mediation, prior to any sort of potential eviction action, prior to any sort of grievance hearing, as Rich does a great job getting those cases to us early. And we send that tenant in, maybe making sure that they're aware of something that they didn't know was a right that they had, making sure that they raise the proper issues to solve their problem foundationally, and that they go into the mediation, trying to limit that power imbalance as much as possible, making sure that they can discuss what needs to be addressed. And then on top of that, like Aaron had said, we make sure that if folks want to, we can get the mediation agreements back for review after the fact. I think because we're seeing so few of those, I think personally that's a testament to folks really buying into the program, really understanding what their rights are and advocating for themselves in the mediation. The housing authority making sure to help solve the issues as well, and then the good job of the mediators making sure that all of the agreements are airtight. So we haven't seen many to review, which I think is good. Folks are leaving their mediations happy, and the ones that we have reviewed have been ideal. And we always tell the tenant, go ahead, sign this. This is good for you. I can't think of one where we haven't done that yet. So I mean, we like you said, these folks have additional rights. We make sure that those are folks are made aware of those, that they're protected, and I think it raises outcomes for everybody when that happens.
Excellent. So my next question is to you, Rich, and you had touched on this when you spoke earlier, but again, for housing authorities that may be looking at trying to get a program like this up and started, what has been the financial cost on your end, and what is the cost benefit ratio that you've been seeing?
Sure. All right. The financial cost at this point in time is, as I said, we have one person right now doing the meetings, so it's a time cost at this point in time. Each mediation takes roughly an hour to an hour and a half. There are some the prep that the mediator will call a few days ahead of time to make sure you get the tenant ledger, see what the issues are, see did the person apply for your app, did the person have previously received financial. So there's a time, and the good thing for us is things are going so well. I'm going to have to hire another employee. We're doing 3-4 mediations a day. But what we're getting out of it, I mean, I'm just looking today as we're talking. We got $6,000 in today for 3 residents, based on the mediations that took place, based on the fact that Abby Ray's staff was able to find funds available, rental assistance. We received $6,000 in today for three residents. So not only is it, again, there's a cost associated with personnel being doing the time, but the benefit of, number one, the rent being paid, collecting the rent, by itself far outweighs any cost. But in addition to that, again, and I think any landlord would know at this point in time, as I mentioned before, unit turn is expensive. Materials, there's a lot of materials that aren't available. We have units that are vacant right now, not because of evictions, or because maybe tenants just moved and so on. So we have units available. And I'm talking to my maintenance staff and said, why aren't these units leased? Well, I don't have enough maintenance people. I don't have enough maintenance people to get into that. So we have, it saves you on, if you can keep somebody in the unit, you're not paying that expense of a maintenance person turning over that unit. You're not, again, the expense of materials and so on. I see this, and I said it before, as an extension to my staff. We have a fairly large housing authority, but we have roughly 173 employees. What I get out of this, in addition, is an extension to my staff. By doing the mediation, I automatically get Abby Ray's Rent and Help Pittsburgh staff working on behalf of my residents. I automatically get, again, Aaron's and Adam's staff working on, we all have the same goal in place. So I have staff that I don't have to pay for, which is even better for me, through the mediation process that are working and helping me collect past due rent, to keep people housed, to avoid legal costs, avoid bad publicity. I mean, that is also the publicity. My board doesn't want to have to hear on the news that we're evicting people. So that's why the title of it is win-win-win for everybody. It's working well for the resident. It's working well for the housing authority. It's hopefully we don't have to get to the point. Hopefully we won't get to the point that we're in front of our magistrate for eviction. But if we do, Adam and his staff and everybody knows that the housing authority, we've done everything we possibly could to keep this resident housed. At that point in time, we would have a mediation agreement that was signed by the resident. So again, we don't want to get to that point. Unfortunately, with some residents, we may get there, but it's going to be in front of the magistrate, in front of Adam's staff, and everybody else is going to, hey, listen, the housing authority has done everything they possibly can or could to keep this center. So the benefits and the cost, it's hard to, I haven't put pen to pencil at this point, pen to paper at this point in time, but the benefits and the financial benefit, it's overwhelming.
Great. Abby, is there something you want to add?
Rich, every time you talk, my heart just swells. But I feel like another benefit that we have a difficult time in enumerating is the collaboration that grows from this relationship together. Rich and I worked very, very closely with Action Housing, with DHS toward the end of ERAB to get Rent Help Pittsburgh a list of all outstanding ACHA applications that had got installed. Somebody didn't turn in the right documents. And my team then was able to do concerted outreach to these residents. And the reason this is important to us is, as we all know, if a person is evicted from a housing authority, their opportunities to find housing moving forward are so slim. So it gives all of us the opportunity to be at the table together as often and as frequently as possible to ensure that as programs are being developed and being implemented, that they are getting to our highest risk populations as effectively and collaboratively as possible. So even outside of mediation, we see it continue to ripple and benefit of the housing authority's bottom line, but most importantly in favor of the tenants that need these programs and are least likely to be able to access them on their own.
Yeah, so I was going to actually raise one of the points that Abby Ray just did, which was, and I mentioned this a little bit before, but by public housing tenants being some of the most at risk, that means that if they are in fact evicted at some point in time, they're going to have tremendous struggles getting into future housing. So by making sure that we get way ahead of the problem, get folks connected to resources long before there's a grievance hearing, long before there's any landlord-tenant eviction filed. We're making sure that nothing has to be on the court docket, nothing has to be on their record. And then in addition to that, the benefit is not just to the housing authority, it's across the board to all of our organizations. If we're getting out way ahead of these things, that means that there's less cases at the MDJ, less cases going to the Court of Common Pleas, and less really intricate and involved cases for us at Neighborhood Legal Services to have to devote attorneys to for extended advice, potentially representation. So we are being able to work on these cases more efficiently. Aaron is able to get out way ahead of these and schedule mediations outside of the time pressures. Same thing with Eddie, outside of the time pressures of potentially a looming court date or a magistrate decision. So it just makes everybody's life a lot easier and more efficient when we're handling these things, upfront as soon as the problem arises with these smooth referrals, as opposed to having to do it under a time crunch if things would pop up after the fact. So the benefit is, certainly to the housing authority, but it is across the board, making sure that, we can all handle these cases as efficiently as possible and as early on as possible.
That's excellent. There's another piece I kind of want to talk about. Allegheny County has now expended all of ERAP. And so you're in one of the first counties in the phase of what is rental assistance after ERAP, and how has that impacted the work that you're doing? So I'm just wondering if you folks could touch on that.
Yeah,
and this is an open question to all of you.
Because we had such a successful ERAP, there's a fly and I apologize. So I'm just going to keep grabbing at the screen. Sorry. Because we had such success with ERAP, Allegheny County DHS and the city of Pittsburgh very rapidly joined forces to try to and successfully earmark funds that are available for rental assistance very specifically for folks that successfully complete mediation agreements. The program itself, like learning the lessons that we've learned through ERAP, the program itself has been designed to be as simple to access as possible, to emphasize tenant need and tenant accessibility. And then as we are moving forward, Allegheny County DHS just issued an RFP for a new vendor of sorts for continued rental assistance. I think that we all learned a lot of really valuable lessons during ERAP. And one of the really big ones that we learned is that the provincial nature of rental assistance accessibility in Allegheny County was a detriment, not just to tenants, but to landlords and to the housing authorities. And I've been really pleased to see how much dedication has come from DHS and the city of Pittsburgh and the URA to centralizing funds as effectively as they are able to. We're big fans of a no wrong door. So what we're trying to do is develop a centralized system that has no wrong door to access. And right now we're doing that with mediation and evictions, so folks with docket filings, but with the hope of being able to find further resources, further funding sources that can help us move further and further upstream. But as we're moving that upstream at accessibility, what we really want to be doing is pushing all landlords and tenants into mediation agreements. So we believe the more you can have these folks talking to one another, the more tenants and landlords are sitting down and safely sharing their concerns, the more effective these relationships are going to get as time passes. So all of that, in short, to say, we do still have some centralized rental assistance that our local governments worked very hard to cobble together so that when ERAP ended, we had ways to incentivize mediation and to keep people in their homes in the eviction pipeline. And the county has shown that they are taking this very seriously by issuing this RFP and helping us to move forward with the lessons that we've learned during ERAP to create as many pathways as possible to keeping people in their homes without having to know every single community organization and what random pots of funds they might have at a given time.
Right. Rich?
I just wanted to bring up something here. As I said, we have well over 3,000, close to 4,000 public housing. We also run a Section 8 program that's roughly 5,900 vouchers. So this isn't all about rental assistance. There's another piece of this for anybody who's on, for housing authorities or landlords who accept Section 8 vouchers. As you know, the tenant is responsible for paying 30% of their income towards rent. The other piece of that is picked up by the federal government, either through an extra HAP, or a housing authority gets extra funding. So what we've seen over, especially because of the eviction moratorium, a lot of times residents were not opening the letters from the Section 8 department for a rent recertification, or if they had an interim, maybe they did lose their job. Maybe they didn't contact their counselor, or maybe they tried to contact their counselor or their housing authority, and because of COVID and the limited staff and people not working, they weren't able to get in touch with the counselor to get the research done. So, and maybe that gone on for, then they just quit trying. So what we're also finding, and that's also true on the public housing side, maybe they didn't, for whatever reason, doesn't matter, whatever reason, they did have a loss of income, and they didn't go to the management office and say, hey, I need to do an interim to lower my rent. The mediation gives the opportunity to do that. Now when the tenant's in front of the meeting, and again, forget about whatever reason it didn't happen, you're an opportunity. The first things we ask, hey, did your income change? Did your income go down? Did you lose a job? Because a lot of the people coming into mediation, their rent, $300 a month, $350. You know, some are 50, some are 75. So that would be the indication. Hey, did you lose your job? Do you have a loss of income? And if you did, we are willing to go back. Actually, we're, as a housing authority, we can go back to October 1st of last year because that's when our fiscal year ended. But our Section 8 department will also go back. And previously, we under HUD rules, we weren't able to go back more than so many days. But what we did, and HUD is letting us do this because of the situation we're all in, they're letting us do interims or recertification, which will lower the amount of rent that the resident had to pay. And if you're a landlord, if that's retroactive, now the rent that's owed to you is not going to come from the resident. Now it's going to come from the housing authority. So it's a benefit for a landlord or a housing authority, but it seems like based on there's more landlords on here than housing authorities. But the benefit to you to go through mediation is, okay, how I can get that money, maybe not through the tenant or rent help. I'm going to get it from an extra HAP because they're entitled to a research that the housing authority is going to let them do now.
Great. So Adam, I'm going to let you have the final thought, and because we are already at the end of our hour, it just went so quickly.
Okay, I'll try to be profound here, I guess. So I actually, Rich also touched on one of the things that I was going to say. As he said in the beginning, you know, a lot of times, one of the main reasons that the problem has gotten so bad for tenants is because of the pandemic, because of maybe a lack of communication with their housing council or a lack of communication with the housing authority, for whatever reason it might be, there really is a deterioration in communication or a certain level of mistrust with the housing authority. And I think by establishing this program, by showing how active, by showing how proactive the housing authority is, by sitting down and having a discussion at mediation, tenants are starting to gain that level of trust back with the housing authority. They're starting to realize that there is an open door to communication, which is extremely helpful in making sure that there's prolonged success. And also, I'll just touch on it again, because every meeting I'm on, I always hammer this point home, how important the research are and making sure that folks are paying the proper amount of rent. So we're saving rental assistance resources. So we're making sure that life is as easy for the tenant moving forward as possible to have sustained success. And the county housing authority's willingness to do retroactive research has been extremely helpful. So, I mean, really everyone's done as much as they can on their parts, which has made this, you know, very easy and has really, I think, you know, the rising tide floats all boats here, and it's helped out for Aaron, it's helped out for Abby Ray, for Rich, for all of our organizations, and for the tenants as well. So it's been very helpful.
I just highlighted a question in the Q&A that was answered a while back about landlord partnership. Essentially, we talked about a housing authority partnership I'd be happy to talk with anybody on the call about developing landlord partnerships beyond this, because we have a uniquely responsive partner right here in Rich and the County Housing Authority. And there are good questions to be asked about how to develop better partnerships with smaller landlords, like HCV landlords, with for-profit landlords that we have partnerships with nonprofit landlords that we have partnerships with. I'd just be happy to share info about that if that's useful to folks.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll be calling you back and calling you folks back to learn more about, what the next evolution of eviction prevention and emergency rental assistance looks like as we start to see all of these pandemic benefits go away. So I want to thank our panel so much for this really, really rich conversation today, and for the amazing work that you're doing on the ground in keeping people safe at home. And I just want to remind folks, our next webinar is going to be on September 23rd at 10 o'clock. We're going to be learning about some of the new resources that were created with the most recent Pennsylvania state budget, specifically whole home repair, along with the new housing options grant program. And we will be joined by Senator Hughes, Senator Sabal, as well as Emily Shapira from the Philadelphia Energy Authority. So with that, we are 4 o'clock on the dot. I want to thank you all for sticking with us through the afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you next time.